Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on whether you're watching this as a podcast or now live. I have to tell you, I am tired. I am good tired. Been preparing to depart for Roswell, New Mexico on Wednesday, and there's always more things to do before most trips than we take into account, and in finalizing one's PowerPoints. Our guest today is Laird Scranton, a good friend and a very esteemed colleague. Laird lives in Albany, and right now, right before we went on the show, Bill Skywatcher, our producer, and he were commiserating about the storm fronts, watching it on radar, moving toward Laird. We've already had him kind of drop out once, so it's nature if he disappears off the air and not technology, I think. Anyway, Laird is the author of more than a dozen books and other writings on ancient cosmology and language. These include articles published in the University of Chicago's Anthropology News, Academic Journal, Temple University's Encyclopedia of African Religion, and the Encyclopedia Britannica. Laird is featured in John Anthony West's Magical Egypt documentary, and in Carmen Boultier's documentary, The Pyramid Code. Laird Scranton is a frequent guest on a wide range of radio and podcast interview shows, including The Red Ice Show in Europe, Art Bell's Desert Desert at Midnight, Coast to Coast Radio, and Beyond Belief with George Norrie and Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Laird is a frequent presenter at conferences whose focus is on ancient knowledge, and he lists quite a lot of them. His books include The Science of the Dogon, Sacred Symbols of the Dogon, The Cosmological Origins of Myth and Symbol, The Velikovsky Heresies, China's Cosmological Prehistory, Point of Origin, The Mystery of Scarabray, a personal favorite of mine, Seeking the Primordial, Decoding Maori Cosmology, Ganesha, The Scientific Symbology of a Hindu God, Primal Wisdom of the Ancients, Tracing Orkney's Origins, and his newest, which we'll be discussing today in good part, The Waters of Life, subtitle, Ancient Symbology and Life Energy. And Laird Scranton, it is a pleasure to welcome you back to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be on.
It's really good to see you, my friend. A lot of people know that you had a health crisis earlier this year. Can we just dispense with folks who are concerned and let them know briefly what it was and how you're doing?
Sure. I went in for what was supposed to be non-invasive heart surgery to repair an aortal valve. And there were congenital deformities in my heart that the surgeons weren't prepared for, and they ended up dropping a device into my coronary artery and almost killed me. Sort of an all hands on deck situation to try to get me back. And 4 days later, I was connected to what one tech described as every life support device they had. So I managed to make it through that. I'm doing pretty well at this point. I'm probably back to 80% of the normal household daily things I had done before the surgery. trying to gain some stamina back in terms of walking. They did a number on one of my thigh muscles, and I'm trying to build up strength in that muscle. I used to walk 4 miles a morning. Now I'm lucky to walk, 3 blocks, but I'm getting there. All in all, I can't complain. I had the attention and focus to finish this book, The Waters of Life, which was mostly completed before I went in the hospital. I've conducted a couple of classes since I've been out of the hospital. Things are going pretty well.
One of the things that's become kind of a theme for me, and it goes back to childhood, of how people in public life, whatever they're known for or their accomplishments, how they become the people they are. And we covered this several years ago when you were a guest on the show. But I'd like to review it a bit also with a bit of a focus on your specialty area of passions, the past, to put it mildly. And you bring it alive and you educate us as you follow these mysteries and often crack codes and solve puzzles and put pieces together that makes the flow of history more understandable and less open to, kind of sensationalistic speculation. So can I ask you, let me just click this box that appeared here, how it began, and in asking you the question, begin with a photo here that I think will register something for you.
Right. This is Wallace, Idaho. This is where my mother and I were both born. At the time, it was about 300 people of silver miners and prostitutes, basically. Little town in the panhandle of Idaho.
Silver miners and prostitutes. Well,
yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what my mother used to do down in the mines.
It sounds like a mutually supportive situation.
These are my siblings. I grew up primarily in Salem, Oregon, and went to high school in Portland, and then college at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie.
And this is the house that you lived in Portland?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Beautiful.
Yeah. This is Winifred Asprey. She was a prime student of Grace Hopper, who was one of the pioneers of computing in the country. Grace Hopper helped develop the COBOL programming language. And this woman was my instructor. She taught me Fortran and a bunch of other things.
Very much ahead of her time. This picture was taken in 1971.
Right.
In our specialty areas that we're known for, myself more than not, UFO studies, yourself, antiquarian research, there are big names and then medium level names, and then the quieter names. John Anthony West has well earned kind of the title of being one of the best known and finest writers and researchers in the field. You met him in 2003, as I recall?
Well, actually, what I had done was I had self-published a book called Hidden Meanings that became The Science of the Dogon in later years. Oh. And I was sending targeted emails to people I thought might have an interest, and one of those emails reached John when he was in Egypt on tour. And he later told me he was upset because I had told him where he could buy the book, but he was the sort of guy who had authors lined up down the block and around the corner to hand him free books. And so he said he'd be damned if he was going to buy the book. So when he got back to the United States, he discovered he lived 45 minutes south of me. And so phoned me one night, and we talked for a while until I finally offered to send him a book. Then he invited me and my wife down to his home at that time in Athens, New York, which is the photo you were showing. He didn't explain to me that he was going to film the meeting. And that film, that video became episode 8 of his Magical Egypt documentary series. The first day we ever met, I was explaining the book to him, and he caught it all on film.
What did your parents do, Laird? I'm trying to, again, just get an idea of, what did they do?
Well, my father was an accountant and a financial advisor and ended up as president of Western Farmers Association, a farmers cooperative in Seattle, the largest farmers cooperative in the country.
Wow.
My mother was a school teacher and a homemaker.
Yeah, with that many kids in the family, yes, homemaking is important. Do you remember as a kid, what was it that sparked your earliest interest in early times, prehistory?
Well, I was extremely fortunate in that Salem, Oregon, as a little city of at the time of maybe about 50,000 people, the way they solved their problem in elementary school of the student who might be bored in class was they hired a team of teachers who were cross-qualified in many different fields. And they used them as a shared resource for all the elementary schools. And they would pull 10 kids out of the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade every day for an hour and a half and teach them whatever they wanted to know. I learned about chemistry and microscopy and psychology and marine biology and codes and you name it. We were allowed to pick what we wanted to study next and allowed to work together to solve problems or to work separately. It was a very unique learning experience. And I credit most of the skills I have in terms of researching the books to those classes.
Amazing. Would that the rest of the country would follow that wonderful model. What was it, though, that made ancient history so compelling for you that is where you went with your life, back in time?
Well, that was really not a major focus for me until the early mid-1990s. My wife, Risa, had read a book called Unexplained by Jerome Clark, where every chapter dealt with a different unsolved mystery. And one of the chapters, the focus was on a little African tribe from Mali called the Dogon. And the Dogon knew some things about astronomy that they really shouldn't know, given that they are a primitive tribe without access to technology. They knew things about the star system of Sirius and that region of the universe. They knew the correct orbital period of the two stars. They knew that there was more than one star there, binary stars. And so I thought, well, anything I learned about this tribe is going to be interesting. And so I started pursuing whatever information I could find. It started with Robert Temple's book, The Sirius Mystery.
I was just about to ask you that was a book that set me off.
Yes. He had the disadvantage of writing before there was an English language translation of the anthropological study of the tribe. So I think he had access to a chapter or two. I had the benefit of access to the entire volume. So the Dogon are a priestly tribe. They deliberately located themselves in a remote region, 8 hours drive from anything we'd consider to be civilized. Their societal imperative is to preserve original ancient symbols and words. Their culture is a kind of umbrella over 4 or 5 different ancient traditions. They have things in common with Judaism, Buddhism, ancient Egypt, Hinduism, and a number of ancient traditions. As a matter of fact, their language is unclassifiable because it includes 18 subgroupings of words from other languages, Turkish and Tamil, the Dravidian languages of the Tamil, and so on. So there's a lot to learn from the Dogon. But they've done such a good job of preserving what they do, their rituals and their symbols and so forth. Their cultural practices are predictive of what you'd find happened in ancient Egypt around 3000 BC.
You know, it's become almost a de facto fallback position for a lot of people who are generally interested in what we're talking about, but sometimes more in the area of popular culture than real scholarship. And well, obviously it's aliens, right? They gave them, super telescopes, and that's how we learned it. End of story. And we can put that on an episode of Ancient Aliens. No, that is the easy way out here. And you were faced with a wonderful challenge. how did they do this? Do you feel that they inherited knowledge from the past, or somehow they were able to put two pieces of ground glass together in a tube? And what was your original thoughts, and what are your thoughts now?
My work is comparative work. I start with a symbolic element from one of the cultures and a flat statement by that culture of how they understand it. And then I test that against what the other cultures say. So the Dogon priests, we have several traditions that are very much in sync with each other, that down through thousands of years, they have claims to be ancient, and they both managed to keep their traditions straight in different languages. We have the Buddhists and we have the Dogon in particular. And so the fact that they managed to keep all the symbology straight, and a modern authority on Dogon culture will be in agreement with a modern authority on Buddhism about what a particular symbol means or a particular concept means. The Dogon, both the Buddhists and the Dogon, claim this as an instructed tradition, that in ancient times, somebody who knew a whole lot about science wasn't talking about theory, they were talking about fact, known fact, laid all this out for us in a symbolic system using what amount to Jung's archetypes to represent the concepts. And what they were trying to describe ultimately is how creational energy works. And when they say creational energy, they're talking about four important themes. One is how matter forms. Another one is how the universe formed. Another one is how biological life comes about. And the last one is how consciousness comes about. Now, they say that a single cluster of dynamics of energy are responsible for all of those things. And so to emphasize that, they have a symbolic system where a single progression of symbols simultaneously represent all four of those themes at the same time. Every symbol has meaning for each of the four themes. Makes the symbolism very complicated.
It's humbling when you think of the Western mindset as a rule, and that, well, they're a tribe in Africa, they're primitive, and isn't it charming that they're still, we can still study them, but please, we've got the lock on real knowledge and information here. Of course, it's not that way. And one of the things you told me about the Dogon that I found fascinating, I'm a generally visually oriented person, but you said that there were concepts that they simply didn't talk about unless they had the drawings there to refer to. Did I muddle that, or what? I just found it really unique. Most people will talk about anything, without any kind of aid.
Yes, well, as I was first working with the information, I realized that, the Dogon priests are flatly saying, look, our symbolism describes how matter forms. And they start with a concept that is indistinguishable from the concept of an atom, our concept of an atom, and they understand that everything material is made from the repeat, the combination in repetition of atoms of the same type. They understand the concept of protons and electrons making up the atom, and they include a drawing that it is credibly like an electron microscope image of an electron orbital for an atom to support the concept of their electrons and protons. So I thought, this looks scientific to me. Starting from the topmost elements here, what are the chances that the whole descending structure that they're trying to represent could be scientific? And so I started educating myself, with Brian Greene and Stephen Hawking's popularizing books on physics, and discovered that in certain cases you could take an entire paragraph and diagram of Stephen Hawking's and substitute the Dogon description and the Dogon drawing, and you wouldn't change Hawking's book.
Remarkable.
I became very, very early convinced that this was science. Now, the book that we're about to discuss, The Waters of Life, is getting to the bottom of the structures. It's actually, my book is actually a follow-on to a previous book called Amma and the Spark of the Universe. And this is getting down to the brass roots of what the Dogon are talking about and what they're trying to represent. In the end, what they're doing is they believe that creational energy rests on a handful of dynamics of energy that repeat on all scales. It doesn't matter what level you look at them on. If you go to the lowest dimensional view of them, you get the simplest understanding of how they work. But if you go to higher dimensional views, if you're looking at, say, how stars form, you get a lot more nuances of how the dynamics work. So, go ahead.
Yeah. Applying nothing but critical thinking and deductive reasoning, is there any other conclusion a reasonable person can reach about this inherited knowledge? I'll characterize it as just that. Or is it possible that somehow, without technology, without any kind of Western assistance, that the level of, could it be a coincidence that they somehow thought about this thing called atoms? Not a concept that most of us think of. We didn't really start to appreciate it until much more recently in our Western evolution. Or, I mean, how else could this knowledge have come to them? And when you kind of pull back and look at the big picture, does it seem to you, like when you discuss the Orkney Islands and the Egyptian influence, no matter how it may sound to somebody who is not educated or knowledgeable about the history of this area and how these cultures met, that we have any other solution or answer to this question other than they knew things that they shouldn't know and we don't know how they got them? Or do you see?
Well, I'll give you a couple of ways of thinking about that. First of all,
please.
The science teachers who taught me, one of the principles they taught me was that there is such a thing as everyday coincidence.
Yes.
But when you're researching questions like these, when you bump up against the third coincidence, it's time to consider whether something beyond coincidence is at work. That you're allowed two gimme coincidences to explain things, but beyond that, it's no longer credible if you try to say the third piece of it is now also coincidental.
Good way to think.
The next thing is that because it's a comparative study, it's not just one culture saying, oh, by the way, this thing represents this thing, which might be coincidental. We then compare it to half a dozen other cultures, and we look at their language, and we look at their symbols, and we look at their myths, and so on. We have numbers of different ways of confirming that the second culture saw things the same way the first culture did. And now we have cross confirmation. One of the examples I use is we know that a 4-year-old's testimony is inherently unreliable. So if a 4-year-old tells us something, we can't count on it being actual objective truth. But imagine we had a room full of 4-year-olds whose teacher was abducted in front of them. Now, if each of those 4-year-olds independently is telling us that the abductor was a tall, thin man with red hair and a beard and a mustache, that rises to the level of corroborating testimony. And for my money, the police should be out looking for that suspect as described by the 4-year-old. So that's what happens with these cultures is when you have many of them saying the same thing in the same way and documenting it in the same ways with the same myths and so forth, it rises to the level of corroborated testimony. We can take it a lot more seriously than if a single culture did it. One of probably the biggest threat to the work I do is what I call wishful interpretation. It's chasing off after unicorns. So if the interpretation begins with me, I've got nothing. The interpretation has got to begin with something objective on the part of one of the ancient cultures. Some ancient authority has to have seen things a particular way for it to be valid. And my job is to understand what they're saying and then cross-confirm it or deny it with the other cultures.
Wow. Going kind of anti-chronologically, I'd like to get more into your most recent book first before we kind of work our way back to some degree. And let me begin, if I might, just by reading the brief liner notes on the back of your new book. In keeping with a range of classic ancient symbolic traditions, the cosmology of the modern-day Dogon tribe of Mali describes how our material universe comes to be evoked through a fairly simple set of dynamic energies. The Dogon priests say that these same energetics, also foster and support the functions of biological life. Moreover, they insist that ordinary, everyday water, with its familiar cycles and forms, presents us with a quintessential pattern for understanding how these creational energies work. In writing books, there's an aspect for the writer like an artist. You have tools, you have materials, you sometimes have a plan, and other times things take you in a direction you didn't intend to go. After dealing with this question and your methodology of confirming and, in a way, linking seemingly different cultures, did the idea for this book begin with just taking that understanding of symbology and going back to the Dogon who you started with, or somehow did it begin with water? How did this book come into your mind with these two factors central to the story you're telling?
Actually, this piece of it began because I understood about the four creational themes, and one of those creational themes is how biological life forms. And I had purchased and was trying to understand some fairly difficult reference books by a biologist named Mei-Wan Ho. She wrote the books to be for the layperson, but a lot of it goes over the head of your average layperson. She's describing about many aspects of how living beings get their energy. And those books focused on water. And so that brought me back around to the ancient concepts of water. The French anthropologist who studied the Dogon for 30 years wrote a diary of his own initiation into the Dogon tradition. And he was French, okay? He entitled the book God of Water in French to emphasize that we're talking about water. In the end, okay, we're all familiar with various insightful metaphors of the ancient mythologies about the sleeping goddess who lies just below the surface of the waters, who opens her eyes and perceives the light. This is the subject of the book of Genesis. And we say, wow, that's really an insightful way to try to represent what happens. As we learn more and more about the Dogon tradition, we come to see that those metaphors are actually objective descriptions of what really happens with the energies. That these are not metaphors. These are someone setting right out in plain view for us what actually happens, and it's up to us to try to sort out how that is. So as it turns out, the dynamics of the various structures coming up from the very bottom of the most primordial level of energy up to the level of binary stars, the structures that form all share important dynamics that are found in water. And that if you want to understand the energies at any particular level, making a direct comparison to water is a huge help. I was trying to sort out what happens at the interface between energy and matter, and discovered that the best way to get at that was to study what happens at the interface between an ocean and air. that the dynamics at the surface of water are the same as the dynamics of energy at that boundary.
Wow. Let's, well, first of all, I know that you could write simply for other scholars and, talk among yourselves, so to say, but you write to the greatest degree possible for the rest of us. A lot of the concepts are challenging, especially somebody like me, a classic dyslexic, and I look at numbers or formulas and my eyes start to spin. But you lay it out in a manner that I can get and appreciate, and always keep it interesting in that I want to know what's going to happen on the next page. And that, when you're dealing with material that for some people they might consider dry or too, intellectual over their heads, or you've got to have studied anthropology, or it's not the case. And this new book, more than ever. And you've sent me a series of 5 drawings that are reference points in the book. And I think this is a good time to start to look at them and get an idea of what you're talking about in the terms the Dogon lay out. 3 images. What are we looking at here?
Okay, the Dogon are describing a dynamic of energy in the universe that repeats on all scales at all sorts of levels. The dynamic moves from, we have 2 energies we're talking about. These are defined in a philosophy called Samkhya in India. But the 2 energies, as the Dogon described them, are clearly magnetism and electricity, and scientifically they would have to be. So what the Dogon are doing is they represent that the starting and ending points of this dynamic of energy that recur, they treat as doorways, door panels, that you have an entry place at both ends of the dynamic. What we're essentially doing is we're moving from a state where electricity is unresisted and magnetism is dormant. That's one starting point. The other starting point, or the ending point, is the reverse of that, where magnetic flux is unresisted and electrical flow is dormant.
And
so
am I to understand that these 2 top illustrations are basically schematics that were originally presented, carved into doors?
Yes, they are. They're carved into the 2 door panels of the house of the highest Dogon priest, who's called the Aru priest. On the left side, we have magnetism in a perfectly ordered state, which agrees with how science diagrams magnetism in a perfectly ordered state, with all the North Poles headed, aimed the same direction, and the South Poles aimed the same direction. Yeah. That is characteristic of superconductivity. As a matter of fact, science hasn't sorted out yet, but the Dogon are saying that the way you get a superconductor is you align the magnetism. That's all you have to do. Make sure that it's all lined up the same way, and you automatically get either the superconductive state or you get the other state, which is called superinsulating. And so when we're talking about the formation of matter, back to our picture again, the second image on the right is how
the storm is really starting to close in on you, isn't it?
It is, a little bit.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, the right-hand picture illustrates how electricity moves when it's unresisted. And the picture below is how science represents that concept. You can see the Dogon got it exactly right. This is intuitively talking about magnetism and electricity. It could hardly be anything else.
Yeah, fabulous. And we go on to the next illustration here. What are we looking at here, Laird?
The Dogon are starting by trying to familiarize us with the attributes of magnetism and electricity. Magnetism moves in a circular way, and electricity moves linearly. The top 2 images are what the Dogon call the 2 guide signs. The Dogon read them from right to left, like Hebrew. And the guide signs, magnetism's role is to guide how electricity moves. the picture on bottom illustrates from a scientific point of view exactly that, how magnetism induces electricity to extend. And you can see you have very similar shapes being represented.
Yeah.
The Dogon know what they're talking about in terms of the dynamics of energy.
Extraordinary. Moving on to the, no, that's a repetition. There we go.
Okay, now in the 1920s, there was an aristocrat in France who was also a physicist. His name was Louis de Broglie. He was a close associate eventually of Albert Einstein and of Schrödinger. And de Broglie did a bunch of work on the hydrogen atom, and he discovered and calculated that, okay, we know in the hydrogen atom that you have one proton and one electron, and that electron can sit in a number of different orbits around the proton, and it moves out at certain increments from the proton for some of those orbits. De Broglie figured out that those orbits correspond to the points of resonance for the energy. This points of resonance, if you think of a musical scale, the note that sounds right, on a piano you hear pure notes. Those are the resonance points of the sound. And in other cultures like Chinese, they sometimes pluck out notes that sort of sit halfway between what we consider to be notes. But the points of resonance are what constitute our musical scale. De Broglie figured out that the reason that energy is absorbed into an atom and emitted from an atom in quanta, in units, is because those units are the resonance units. That's the point where resistance is least and the energy has the easiest time moving from a captive situation to a free situation.
So what we're looking at in the lowest illustration, the word Ren, and seeing
we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
And in the top illustrations, okay, you see the almond shape at top.
Yeah.
That's what de Broglie describes as the cyclical presence of magnetism for the electron as it orbits a hydrogen atom. That's that if you were drawing a picture, if you're graphing the math of it, that's the shape you get. And there's a reason. There's geometry to the hydrogen atom that produces that shape. The zigzag shape that's below it is the same thing. It's the cyclical presence of magnetism for the components of the proton. Now, I know that those two shapes happen to be important ancient Egyptian glyph shapes. So as soon as I saw, this article that de Broglie wrote in 1920 formed the foundation of Schrödinger's quantum theory. But de Broglie's article got disappeared for a century. For a century, it had not even been translated into the English language. And Schrödinger hardly mentions it. I think there's one paper in the 100 years that another modern French physicist says mentioned the concept of resonance the way that de Broglie interpreted it. But I know that those two shapes are important Egyptian glyph shapes, so I started looking at ancient Egyptian glyphs that were written with them and turned up words like the one on bottom, which Budge pronounced. Budge is the compiler of the Dogon Dictionary. He interprets the word to be pronounced Ren. But that's open to question because certain Egyptian glyphs were not pronounced. And so the linguists have to guess what the vowel sounds were, and they don't always get it right. Yeah. Now, the Dogon language is built on syllables that work like symbols. These are syllables that represent basic concepts of science. And they mix and match the syllables together to produce more complicated words and more complicated concepts. So a person like me, simply by hearing the pronunciation of a Dogon word, can guess fairly correctly what the meaning of the word must be because those syllables have meaning to each other. And I know that this word Ren that Budge documents based on correct cosmological symbolism really should be Re-Na. Re is an Egyptian word that refers to energy, and Na is a term that across various cultures refers to the feminine non-material. This is non-materiality. And so Budge interprets this word as expressing the concept of the divine name. It reads energy of the feminine non-material.
Huh.
And we find it literally expressed in the resonant aspect of a hydrogen atom. That's the place where it's easiest for someone like me to understand how it works and what it represents and why it's important. It's the concept of hidden energy in ancient cultures. When they talk about a hidden god or hidden energy, this is what they're talking about. Now, Samkhya, which is the philosophy that sort of first put this all down in writing in India in around 100 BC, Samkhya is a companion to yoga. Samkhya is the cosmological side of it, and yoga is the personalized energy side of it. And Samkhya says that we have two universes. Universes form in pairs, and there's a cycle of energy between the universes that is as vital to life in the universes as the natural water cycle, we'll get back to water again, is to life on our planet. That energy scrolls from the non-material side to the material side, and it's because of that scrolling energy that we have material forms and like atoms, and we would have nothing if it weren't for that cycle of energy. So these graphs of de Broglie's describe how those two energies relate to one another. We can think of it another way, but by another metaphor. One of the things that confused me about the ancient symbolism is that the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic language has two different words for the concept of time. I thought, why do you need two words for time? Well, the reason you need two words for time is because those dynamics of energy are produced by the interactions of the proton, which is like a tiny magnet with a north and a south pole, and the electron moving circularly around that proton, and you get some complicated resonances happening there. One of those resonances is a broad oscillation, and it compares to how the sun moves from the equinox to the solstice and back to the equinox again. It's a 3-stage oscillation. And the other resonance is like linear time. It compares to how the dynamic of sunrise to sunset. There's an image I didn't send you that's at the top of my Facebook page. It shows, it's a picture of Orkney Island in northern Scotland, and it shows the sun setting at the equinox. It's setting squarely between two mountains that are across a body of water from where some standing stone circle sat. That geography replicates those two modes of time. By looking at the sun, watching the sun set behind those mountains, you witness the dynamic of how sunrise to sunset interacts with the oscillating dynamic of solstice to equinox to solstice. That was deliberate. Orkney Island at 3200 BC was a place where these cosmological concepts were being taught. Yes. From that point forward, many other cultures deliberately established their important sites in view of two mountains where the sun either rose or set between the two mountains. If you go to Abydos in Egypt, there's a cemetery where all the dignitaries of the first two dynasties of Egypt were buried that's in direct view of a similar gap between two mountains. In fact, the name Abydos, according to Om Seti, originally was Abdu, which meant the desired mountain. Huh. Hinduism says it was commonplace for Hindu sites to be located in view of those kinds of mountains. In earlier times, before Orkney, they didn't use two mountains to accomplish this. They used a single mountain that looked like an elephant to accomplish it. If you go to Elephantine Island at 4000 BC, the temple there was placed in view of a single mountain that looks like a reclining elephant. I have emails from people who live in Elephantine right now who say, you can tell that summer's almost here because of where the sun's setting behind the mountain.
Of course.
So the mountain provided a natural agricultural calendar for the people who lived there who were trying to farm the land. They knew when to plant and when to harvest their crops based on where the sun was.
Brilliant. You sent one more illustration And a most intriguing one, Ganesha, of course, the very identifiable Hindu god. And now that I'm looking at it, this depiction in this pose, of course, my eye goes right up to A and B. Tell us about what we're seeing here.
Okay. One of the other photos I think I sent, but may not have come through, shows a kind of a spiral, the way that resonance is carried forward in the universe. It's based on spinning energy that produces 7 rays of a star of increasing length. As the Dogon draw on the left, you can see the reason you get those rays is because as energy spins, Einstein tells us that it slows the pace of time down. What that means is, if we had an objective observer standing outside of everything who could measure how long a moment took, that the objective duration of a moment gets longer. And so when energy spins, according to the Dogon, it's causing time to slow down the way Einstein says it does. And it's producing moments that take longer and longer and longer and longer. And in the span of that longer moment, light is able to extend further outward than it did before. And so it produces rays that are of increasing length. If we draw a spiral around the endpoints of the rays of light in the left picture, we get a Fibonacci spiral.
And the reason I've seemed distracted is I am chasing down that image, which you're absolutely right. I did not remember to load in. And let me see if I can bring it up right now. It is. And bingo. Let's go to the spiral.
Okay, on bottom, you have how science represents the way that resonance is carried forward among structures that are in the same phase with each other.
Right. Okay.
At top is how the way the Dogon draw it. It's that same 7 rays of a star we were talking about. The Dogon refer to this as the egg of the world. Hinduism refers to it as the world spiral.
Yes.
Now, one of the titles in India of Ganesha, the elephant god, is Ganapati. And if we interpret Ganapati in terms of Sanskrit, they decide that the word means Lord of the Ganas, which is pretty unspecific. But if instead we choose to interpret it in terms of Dogon phonetics, it means world spiral. That Ganesha's symbolism is to this same world spiral. Now, we catch the Dogon in the act of anthropomorphizing their figure on the right-hand side of this. And they anthropomorphize it in 2 ways. One way is they consider the top 2 rays to be a head. They consider the next 2 lower rays to be 2 arms.
Yep.
They consider the next 2 legs rays to be 2 legs.
Yeah.
And they consider the the 7th one to be a single tusk. Now, the other way that they anthropomorphize it is they use the top 2 rays to represent a head, and the next 4 rays to be 4 arms, and then the last ray to be a single leg on which Ganesha dances. And those are the 2 classic poses that Ganesha is positioned in. I have an article written by Phyllis Granoff from Yale University. She translated an obscure Sanskrit text whose focus is on the symbolism of Ganesha, and it talks all about the formation of this spiral of matter. She's looking for some culture that has a pattern that the descriptions fit, and the Dogon do that. The Dogon system constitutes that. Ganesha's symbolism is entirely about the dynamics of energy that form that spiral.
Did you think it unusual that this African tribe in Mali had focused in on an archetypical Hindu deity, or it's just a matter of course because you see these things intersecting in your work going back in many cultures?
Well, you have to trace back to where this started. From my point of view, this starts in the era of Göbekli Tepe around 9000 BC. The Dogon information corresponds to Egyptian culture at around 3000 BC. So there's 6,000 years difference in between. The Dogon actually preserve a carved altar stone where the carvings on the stone are indistinguishable from what we see at Göbekli Tepe, the same type of flat animal figures carved in the same way. The Dogon preserve Turkish words in their language and Dravidian words. We can almost trace, based on Dogon language, what the path of transmission of the tradition had to be for them to have picked up all the different languages they picked up. So one of the paths of transmission is southeastward from Turkey, and that passes into India. So the traditions of India preserve certain elements of instruction that was first given at 9000 BC, and other cultures preserve other aspects of that same instruction. In fact, there are naming conventions for various ancient tribes who benefited from that instruction, and the names of the tribes sort of declare how can I say, a specialization subject, like the what did you major in college? There's
Can you give us an example? Can you give us an example?
Group called the Naki or the Naxi, who were from the Tibetan borderland. This is a tribal, a priestly group that's sent out to a remote site the same way the Dogon apparently were. Na is a cosmological syllable that refers to the non-material feminine, as in Rena, that we were talking about. The Ki or Xi portion of their name is an Egyptian word Sakai that means to celebrate. The Dogon have an annual, a 50-year celebration of the stars of Sirius. They call it the Sigi. That comes from that same word Sakai. So the name of the Naki or the Naxi flatly says celebrates the feminine non-material. That's their specialty. Now, one of the huge benefits I have going for me in my research is that prior to about 500 BC, every ancient cosmological word explained its own meaning to us. It defined its own meaning.
This is the storm catching up right now. We've been hearing some rumbling in the background, and we knew this was possible. In fact, again, before the show began, Bill Skywitcher, producer, and Laird and I were watching the moment-by-moment shift of the storm that is right now all over the place in the Albany area. Obviously, you can understand why Laird's work absolutely fascinates me. And here he is back again in a frozen form with Bill, our producer. And Bill, you produced the show 2 years ago when Laird was first on. You produce a lot of shows, but there aren't a lot of people like him.
He's brilliant.
He is. And the words come to mind like mind expanding. We usually think of it in terms of psychedelics and the like, but it's putting pieces together. And it's one of the reasons why I am such a fan of his. We all have our specialty areas. Some of us know a fairly large amount about a few things, but we know very little about a lot of things. We know bits and pieces. And you can almost see the way his mind is working. And like a lot of great authors, if you start to read his books and you're able, read them in the order that they were written, because you just can't go wrong with that. It's like, following a great detective novel series. You can read them out of sequence and it's just fine. And sometimes we discover a book and it's the one that brings us into somebody's work. And, there we go from there. And
back again, I was talking about language.
Yeah.
That prior to a certain date, prior to 500 BC, ancient cosmological words all tell us they all define their own meanings in one way or another. For the Dogon, the syllables carry meaning. And so if you substitute concept for syllables, you can interpret what the word was meant to mean. In hieroglyphic language, it was exactly the same way, that you substitute concepts for glyphs and you produce a sentence that defines the meaning of the word they're writing. So I don't even have to guess what the terminology means. The linguists are trying to figure out, now, where did this come from and what does it probably mean? The form of the word itself flatly tells us that. We don't have to guess it. It's right there.
Extraordinary. This is a perfect time to take a break. In fact, it's de rigueur. We will see you in 4 minutes, weather willing. And this is Peter Robbins with my special guest, Laird Scranton. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and we will be back in 4.
Thank you.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Okay, I'm glad you got it sorted out.
And we're back. Peter has lost power as well.
Okay. He and Putin.
You know what we're going through right now. I'm dealing with it. These horrible storms.
Okay.
And they're moving to you. But if you would like to continue where you left off,
sure.
The hieroglyphic and the translation with the Dogon.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so let me know when we're live and I'll start.
You're on live.
Okay, great. Well, with hieroglyphic language, we have direct comparability between ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and ancient Chinese hieroglyphs. We have certain words that were formulated exactly the same way in both languages originally. So this is a system that was taught to many different cultures, and those languages did not pop up independently of each other.
All right, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So would this language be one of the first languages that is known in modern, let's just call it modern human history?
I would say probably not, because this is tailored to express cosmological concepts. So, for example, the Dogon syllables and the glyphs of the Egyptian hieroglyphic language. Okay, the trick for a scribe in Egypt was, when he wanted to write a word, he had 4,000 glyphs to choose from. He needed to produce a word that was pronounced a certain way because he had to agree with the spoken language. But he also had to pick a set of glyphs that expressed the idea he was trying to get across and combine them together. You know, there are only about 40 phonetic values being expressed in any written language. Uh-huh. So there's no good reason why the Egyptians needed 4,000 glyphs. But that gave him a choice of 100 different glyphs that were pronounced about the same way to pick from to spell his word.
Interesting. So, I'm fascinated with the Dogon, the tribe, and their understanding of astronomy. And
right.
I found that to be fascinating, that they were able to tell which constellations and star systems that it took modern astronomers to figure out years later that what they were depicting was accurate. And I find
now the reason that there's focus on certain constellations and stars is because those bodies illustrate right in front of our eyes certain dynamics of energy that Dogon are trying to help us understand. That the Sirius stars, there are relationships among those stars that are important for our understanding of how the energy works. And before we're done here tonight, I'll try to explain how that works, how it is that the Sirius star system connects to these same energies that are producing matter. As a matter of fact, I think that's where I'm going to go next with this. Okay. We have a continuum of energy that begins with magnetism dormant. Magnetism is sleeping, and it ends with electricity dormant. The first stage of that is called superconductivity. And in a superconductive setting, the electricity forms a circuit that is perpetual. It'll go on forever without any addition of energy. It'll go on endlessly. Now, any disruption to that circuit, either from the outside or just random disruptions of the circuit that happen, produces a spark. And that spark is the equivalent of an electron. And it evokes two magnetic poles, a north and south magnetic pole, and now you have a unit of 3 monopoles that become the basic unit of energy. It's called a proton-electron pair. And those monopoles emerge in that domain that we looked at earlier where all the magnets were lined up the same way. We know that magnetism, when the magnets are all lined up the same way, pull together. Well, these monopoles end up flipping over the other direction, and so now they're parallel to the rest of the.
This storm is really acting up on his end as well. Hopefully we'll get him back. Just a message from Peter. Peter's power is still out. I just got a message from Peter Robbins. This is the way it is, folks, live. And he's not sure when his power is going to be restored. He's hoping to come back soon. So hopefully Laird will be coming back with us shortly as well. But I've always been interested in the Dogon tribe and the fascination of how they were way ahead of their time and isolated, and yet knew a lot about astronomy and other areas of scientific interest. But hopefully, we just lost Laird. So hopefully we'll get Peter and Laird back. But in the meantime, I'm going to share on the screen a couple of his books. And I don't know if Peter did this earlier, but I'm going to put them in the order that Peter had them here, because that's how efficient Peter usually is. The Science of the Dogon, Decoding the African Mystery Tradition. Laird has a lot of incredible works, and to understand it, I would say you would have to look at this in a sequence of these books. That's how he wrote them. That was the intention. So Sacred Symbols of the Dogon, the Key to Advanced Science and the Ancient Egyptian Hieroglyphs. Moving on to the next one, China's Cosmological Prehistory, the Sophisticated Science Encoded in Civilization's Earliest Symbols. So you could see where his work is on the early works of language, symbolism. I'm just going to keep rolling through here, Laird. I'm going through your books. And
okay, so I was talking about the proton-electron pair.
Yes.
When the electron orbits the proton in a hydrogen atom, it can take different positions. But the smallest orbit, it connects up with the proton. It creates what we think of as a neutron. There's no such thing as a neutron. That was one of the confusions for me with the Dogon system. Is they talk about electrons, they talk about protons, but they never talked about a neutron, because a neutron is a form of a hydrogen atom. It's a proton-electron pair.
But Laird, how would they know the science behind it?
Well, they say they know it because their teachers who already understood it thoroughly taught them, and the Buddhists agree. So since we have corroborating testimony, I go with the idea that that's what happened. But the Dogon carry it one step further than the Buddhists do. The Buddhists say they got it from a non-human source. The Dogon say not only was it non-human, it was also originally non-material. I'll try to explain how that happens. Okay, people who are familiar with deep sea, deep ocean water realize that in the very deepest parts of the ocean, the water self-differentiates into biological zones. And different kinds of plants and animals live in different zones depending on how much sunlight they need, what temperature of water they like, how much water pressure they like, and things like that. And so the forms that are living on the bottom of the ocean are very different than the ones that are living at the top. Well, the Dogons say that energy does the same thing, and it produces 14 domains that are differentiated by a slowing pace of time. And the boundary between these 14 domains are points of resonance, like musical notes on the musical scale.
Are you talking about frequency, vibration?
Yeah, well, if you look at the electromagnetic scale, you see that energy that began with very short wavelengths at the time of the Big Bang, we now measure as microwaves, which have very long wavelengths. The electromagnetic spectrum documents the slowing of the pace of time for us. We also know that the pace of time is slowing because the further out into space we look, the faster things are happening. They're now at a point where they can't figure out how entire galaxies formed as quickly as they did. They don't realize it's because back then time ran a lot more quickly than it does now. And that's reflected in the frequency of the energy.
Wow.
So the Dogon are saying that at certain points in this cycle, when the energy is scrolling, the mass between our domain of energy and the next domain over from us equalizes, like sand in an hourglass. You start with all the sand in the top of the hourglass and it filters down into the bottom. But at a certain point, you have the equal amount of sand in both globes. When that happens with the energy, it becomes possible to cross over between domains, the same way you use an airlock to get out of a sub underwater or the way you get out of a spaceship in space. You equalize the pressure, and then you're able to get out safely.
So are you also talking about an overlap in time and space?
Talking about differences in time frame that at certain points in the cycle equalize with each other. And so now a creature that actually lives in the next domain over from ours is able to cross the way a whale can cross all the zones in the ocean. And so when it comes to talking about UFOs and talking about the mythical teachers of the Dogon, what they're talking about is an intelligence that's not human, that originally existed in the next domain over from ours energetically. And then at 3200 BC, the middle of the energetic cycle, they were able to cross into ours. This is what all the tales about fairies are about. You remember there were eras where if you went back to the same site a year later from when they originally saw fairies dancing in a circle, they could see the same fairies still dancing.
But is that residual or is that an actual?
That's an actual, but the year represents a difference in time frame between the two. The guy who wrote the story of Rip Van Winkle, Washington Irving, his father was from Orkney. This is a story about crossover into a fairy domain where there's a time difference, and Rip Van Winkle ends up aging a lot more quickly than his friends who are here do.
See, this opens up a Pandora's box of so many different questions. I mean, are we possibly thinking of there's a parallel universe or?
The Dogon call these superimposed domains. Okay, if you look at a biological cell, there are chemical reactions going on within that cell that all happen at a range of different paces. They reflect different time frames, but they all work together to create life in the cell. You can think of it the same way that a jazz combo works, that every player in the jazz combo has complete freedom to play what they want, but it's got to be in keeping with what the rest of the combo is doing. Energetically, this is called quantum coherence. It's why you need two modes of time. One mode is a mode of overview. The other one is a mode of detail. That's the nature of consciousness, the ability to take a thing, see it in overview, break it down into detail, and then put it back together. That's consciousness. So energetically, we're saying that consciousness and that life itself is quantum coherent. It works the way a jazz combo works. That every event that happens, we have the ability to perceive in terms of how it affected electricity or how it affected magnetism. And depending on which one we focus on, we either get the overview view of what's going on or we get the detail. That's also what the story of Osiris is about. It's about taking a thing that's whole, breaking it down into 14 pieces and scattering it across the land and then pulling it back together to reconstitute it. That's a description of how consciousness works.
That's fascinating, Laird. That is, I mean, when you think about it that way, so is there an applied science to prove these theories that this is the case, that the Dogon were right in what they were discussing?
Well, all of those pictures that Peter showed are intuitive demonstrations that they got it exactly right, because the Dogon drawing that's used to represent the thing lines up perfectly with the scientific diagram that represents the same thing. Now, we're not in a realm where we can prove things to 5 decimal positions, but we can certainly demonstrate to the satisfaction of anybody's intuition that the Dogon understand what they're talking about.
Interesting. Now, has anybody interacted with the Dogon? I mean, what's happened with the tribe?
Okay, the Dogon, the way the esoteric tradition works in the Dogon, with the Dogon is one student works with one informant, and it's the job of the student to ask the next question for his own education. The women work with the women, the men work with the men. The initiate asks the next question, and as long as it's appropriate to what the initiate's already been told, the priest is required to give a truthful answer. If it goes too far, if it jumps too far ahead of what the initiate knows, the informant is required to remain silent, or if he has to, he can lie to throw the initiate off the track.
Wow.
And there's certain deliberate fibs along the way that the tradition makes, where they're telling you something that you later figure out based on what other things you know that it can't be the truth, that they were fibbing about that thing.
Why? But why would they do that? Why would they purposely do that to a student, to a person that's trying to...
Part of what they're trying to teach is what they call discriminating knowledge. It's being able, facts are, to know a list of facts is one thing, but the ability to draw a correct inference from those facts is an entirely different skill, and they're trying to teach both skills.
Yes. So they're trying to have them hone in on their intuitive, their education, the skill, and put all the pieces together in a certain order to come to the next conclusion.
Right, and they want them to be practiced at checking out the reliability of what someone tells them. You know, how do we know this is true? As a matter of fact, for me, with interpretations, I said that an interpretation has to begin with a flat statement on the part of one of the ancient cultures. But the last piece of the interpretation is I've got to be able to complete a simple sentence. The sentence is, we know this must be true because, and then in a simple way explain how it is that we can't see it any other way than the way they're presenting it. What compels us to accept as truthful what they're telling us?
It's mind-blowing that's the way they go about on how they hand it down, the knowledge in that form.
Right.
It's like you ask me a question, and if I think it's valid, I'll answer it. And if you're asking a question that's pretty much out of context, I'm either not going to say anything to you or I'm going to lie to you.
Right.
Because you're not...
If you have to. I mean, they prefer not to lie, but if they have to, they will.
Because you're not asking the relevant question that should be next in the order that it should be.
Right. But that's also helping me build a coherent body of knowledge myself, to think about what I've already learned and extrapolate from that about what do I need to know next. I mean, that's basically the process I had to go through to write these books.
Did you actually go to Africa? Did you go to the location? And
no, and the reason I didn't is because the Dogon will not talk truthfully with somebody until they trust them. And that's a 20-year process.
Wow.
In every culture that has this esoteric tradition, it takes 20 years of affiliation with the tribal group before the person who's writing about it was trusted with the information. Even the French anthropologists who went there for 30 years to study the Dogon didn't start getting the straight truth from them until the middle of they started in the 1930s, and they didn't start getting the truth to the middle of the 1950s.
Wow. That's fascinating in itself, that it takes that long to develop a relationship, to even gather some information, a starting point. Before
this is the same process that trying to think what it's called. In Western culture, you had people with advanced art skills and so forth taking on initiates. I'm trying to think what they're called. The students who study with a master wood carver, person who studies with a master art, like someone like Da Vinci. That whole apprentice system was the way things were done in Western culture for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it worked perfectly well to pass very complicated knowledge forward to the new apprentice.
Wow. Is anyone currently interacting with the Dogon tribe, or if you're?
Yeah, I mean, there are people that presumably they're still being instructed the way they always were. And I don't know of anybody personally who's involved with that. And I'm sure they don't feel at liberty to speak about it if they're doing it. Mm-hmm. But because it's also understood in these traditions that it's possible under the right circumstances to self-initiate and self-educate. A few years ago, a friend gave me a book written by an African healer called Malidoma Some. Malidoma Patrice Some. This is a guy who was born into the Dagara tribe, who are cousins to the Dogon, and then forcibly taken away and educated in the Western tradition. And then he went back as a teenager to become initiated in his tribe. And he describes what he went through, the processes he was required to go through to be initiated. And as I read his book, I realized, hey, my adult son and I have both gone through that exact same process. Without knowing it, we self-initiated this piece of it.
Wow. Is there any new relevant information? I know you've written books on this that the public is, not really aware of. Because I know of the stuff with dealing with astronomy, but is there anything right now, especially what's going on currently with UAPs and?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the way to come to arrive at an understanding of it is, back in the 1920s and 30s, there was a community of very intelligent physicists. These are the Schrodingers and the de Broglie's and the Einsteins and so forth. Now, each one of these, there may be half a dozen or more of them who took the task on themselves to try to explain this, the new physics in everyday language, layman's terms. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, these are people who witnessed every stage of development of the theories that led to quantum theory and wave theory and things like that.
String theory, yeah. Okay.
They understood intuitively why was it that this guy's discovery knocked that discovery out of acceptance. What was it that didn't hold water in terms of this guy's view that makes sense in terms of the new view? And they sat down and they wrote books to explain it to people like me who didn't want it in terms of mathematical formulas. They wanted it in terms of plain English. Explain this to me. How come? What is it that causes the various kinds of quantum weirdness and so forth? And what happened? I've spent the last couple of years buying and studying this back on.
I think we're going to lose him again. See, I want to know if the connection is established between going back thousands of years. Of course, a lot of people speculated. I am definitely one of them. When you have Sumer, Dilmun, the connection between Persia and Egypt and Africa and other parts of the world, was this something that was shared globally? Because there's evidence that it's here as well in North America, South America, Central America, the land bridge, or whether they came here, the Phoenicians came here. I want to know if there's a connection, because there is a connection, and hopefully Laird will be coming back. I even question if it was actually the Egyptians. This is just my own opinion, everyone. If the Egyptians actually built those pyramids. And I really want to get down to those kind of things with Laird, because he's written many different types of books, as I was going on before. Point of origin, Göbekli Tepe. I mean, that's another one. How old is that site? 12,000, 14,000 years old? Here's another book, Primal Wisdom of the Ancients. Seeking the Primordial. The Velikovsky Heresies. Worlds in Collision and Ancient Catastrophes Revealed. And that's another thing, the Great Flood. There's so many things I can ask this gentleman. The Great Pyramid hoax, the conspiracy to conceal the true history. That's exactly what I was just saying. The true history of ancient Egypt. Now, I'm going to tell you all something. You could take it for what it's worth. I know someone that told me in the past that was in Egypt at a location. And here comes Laird, hopefully. I'll get to that maybe later. Laird, I mean, you've got me like thinking about so many different things. I mean, I wish I had more like time to talk to you. Obviously, we got about 30 minutes, but you're talking about thousands of years ago that they had this knowledge, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But so did the Egyptians, quote, end quote. I'm just going to say that.
Right.
But you have Dilmun, you have Sumer, you have the Persians, all these different widespread Africa, Middle East.
Right.
Even here in the Americas.
Right. I mean, Native American tribes have the same thing. And there's certain signatures you can tell by. One of the signatures is that technique I was talking about of the sun rising behind a mountain. That if you have an agricultural society that located themselves in view of a mountain like that to watch the sunrise or sunset, for sure they were part of the same tradition. If you have a culture who imagined that there was a wheel associated with Orion, you look up there, there's no wheel that you can see with Orion. But if a culture said that they thought there was one, that's part of a cosmological myth that's central to this whole thing. Mm. If they measured with cubits, they benefited from the same instruction.
So I just want to go back. I'm going to go off track a little bit.
Okay.
Supposedly in Dilmun, it describes the Great Flood. It seems like to me, would you consider Dilmun to be like the earliest established language before Sumer? Because Dilmun predates Sumer, correct?
Yeah. I don't have a perspective on what the first language was because I pick up with the cosmological language, which had to have come from this group of teachers. So it could not have been the first language that people used. Mm.
So the teachers, tell me a little bit more about the teachers. Where are you talking about otherworldly teachers, or when you say cosmologically teachers?
Okay. So, the Dogon define, we were talking about the three monopoles that emerge from superconductive state. According to the Dogon, one of the roles of those monopoles is to communicate between the energetic domains, to communicate between, all of these traditions define the concept of a primordial consciousness, but they don't deify it. They don't try to turn it into a god. Mm. They say consciousness is a natural outgrowth of magnetism and electricity in a lot of the same ways that a weed is going to grow any place the circumstances are right. Wherever the seed for the weed happens to fall, it's going to grow if it can. Consciousness is the same way. It's going to take hold at any level it can if the circumstances are right. And so the feminine non-material is one of the terms for that primordial consciousness. And the monopoles are the method by which that feminine non-material communicates to the other domains. As a matter of fact, the Dogon term for that collective group of monopoles is the Tityeni. The word Tityeni is defined colloquially to mean messengers, or sometimes it's translated, it means to greet. But what it literally means is to send to say hello. This is an expression of a very friendly intelligence. One of the things those orbs do, these orbs of energy do, is what John Burke, a well-known researcher, proposed that they were connected with. This is the fertilization of agricultural seeds. He did scientific studies on ancient sites to demonstrate that if you brought a group of agricultural seeds to the top of a pyramid in Central America and left them there under the right circumstances, you could produce 10 times as as healthy a crop as other seeds.
Oh.
And these orbs of light, the orbs of light appear in places like that are very wet, like wet caves. They appear anywhere that water is broken down into ions. It's the separation of the ions that fosters an environment that attracts those orbs.
So are the orbs actually a conscious living entity?
The Dogons say they are, and one of those varieties of orbs is what became the Dogon teachers. They crossed over from the domain next to ours into our domain, knowing that it was a one-way trip, and took the form of a living creature and gave instruction to people like the Dogon.
Because I'm sure you're aware, Laird, there are people who have claimed to have come in contact with orbs. Obviously, they give off energy, but also that the orbs communicate with them.
Right. I mean, look at the story of Moses on the mountain. That the burning bush might well have been containing an orb.
Or maybe simply based on that time period's description, the burning bush might have been the best way to describe what he was saying at that moment. And
right. I mean, yeah, who knows what it actually was.
Exactly.
But, okay, now to take it the next level, I talk about the three monopoles emerging together, and the electron gets pushed out into an orbit around the proton. The Dogon are saying that's exactly what happened with the two Sirius stars and our sun, that all three emerged together from a spiraling birthplace of stars called Barnard's Loop, and that our sun got ejected.
We're going to lose him again. I apologize to those that are watching. Like I said, he lives near Albany in New York. I am south of his location. And I don't know if you've seen what's going on behind me, but we've had very bad storms all day here in the Hudson Valley, up north areas. And Peter's even having issues. Unfortunately, Peter probably still is without power. I've heard, I've been doing this a long time as a producer, and I've been involved with different guests. You can only imagine. And you hear about the shared consciousness, the metaphysical aspect. But it seems like with the Dogon, there's a science. There's an actual science application, a method. And I have to ask him, he mentioned like in the 30s and 40s, scientists look at this Einstein, but are they really looking at this now? And I wouldn't be surprised if they are. Like scientists are looking at what the Dogon have been talking about for thousands of years. I mean, it seems they're advanced in their understanding of, like I said, astronomy earlier, the cosmos. And did they interact with an intelligence, a form of life that may not have been physical in the sense, but more conscious? I think that sometimes we think of life as being carbon-based, to the understandings that what we think they would appear as. You hear so much about grays and all these other type of extraterrestrial type species. But what if it's nothing like that? What if it's more of an energy source, like a light being, interdimensional? And I personally, for me, I'd lean more interdimensional. To me, that makes more sense than traveling here from vast distances. I'm not underestimating a civilization's capacity to be technologically advanced thousands of years ahead of us. But it's still, we are such a small speck in the universe, in our galaxy, to find us. But maybe we're making ourselves known a little bit too easily for them to follow and zone in on us. Who knows? But yeah, I'm just like, Laird, it's fascinating because I was just telling the audience that is watching or listening, that I hear a lot. I've heard a lot about the metaphysical aspect, the consciousness aspect, but it seems like the Dogon seem to have a scientific explanation behind it. And I'm curious, do you think that our scientists or scientists around the world are actually looking at this and trying to put an applied method to it? Like
they are, but there I can see definite signs of deliberate misdirection. I think that at some point along the line, the ones who understood what was actually going on, which I believe Einstein did, set most of the world scientists off on a wild goose hunt with string theory and theories like that. Even quantum, what can I say? The Schrodinger's quantum theory is a misdirection in that I don't think that it's true that everything's based on probabilities. It's based on things that connect mechanically, only sometimes so quickly that we are not able to measure them properly. They look random to us, but they aren't really random. And so I'd say that just like with UFO knowledge, we can see that there is a subset of the world that has the technology that is making use of it for their own benefit, but not sharing it with the rest of the world. I'd say that's where a lot of this is at in terms of the science.
Oh, I think a lot of that is also obviously it's going to be for the military industrial complex. And then it's under the umbrella of national security. And of course, they're not going to share it with any other country because they want to be ahead of everyone else.
There are profits to be made from this stuff. They're not going to just hand it off.
Right. And to think about the applications that can be used with this technology for everyday use, for power sources. And I mean, it could break everything to pieces, because I think you have to think about all the corporations that have a vested interest in trying to take that as long as they can. Fossil fuels, on one side, you have the green energy folks on the other. But if this was to come out like an energy source that can power a city with a small little box, I'm just hypothetically saying that.
Right.
It changes everything completely.
Right.
And like you said, it's all about the money. As long as money's to be made on other things, they will wait. They will wait till the last second until all resources are done and run out. Then they'll say, oh, but look what we have, this shiny little box.
Now, Hinduism talks about levels of consciousness. Those levels of consciousness coincide with these 14 domains I'm talking about of energy. Rene Guénon is a famous metaphysician who wrote in the early 1900s numbers of books getting down into the nitty-gritty of how metaphysics work. And the idea is that we have superimposed levels of consciousness, that individual consciousness is just sort of the tip of an iceberg.
Would you consider out-of-body experience or people that have lucid dreams to be part of that consciousness, like going to
and anything that we consider to be paranormal potentially is part of that same set of energetics, that I think there are potential scientifically valid explanations for why and how all these things work. Samkhya says that the non-material domain makes routine efforts to communicate knowledge to the material side and to induce action from people on the material side. And that there are many different ways of receiving that paranormal effects and telepathy and intuition and vivid dreams, the odd behavior of animals. There are all sorts of different ways, like ayahuasca type drug use. There are many different ways to connect with it.
But there has to be a scientific, like, if we're going to talk science, that means there's something within us, in our brains, that acts as a receiver or a transceiver. Correct? If it's an unconscious level, or...
I mean, if Yes, I mean, if consciousness is a natural byproduct of the energies, we know that we have ways of connecting to the energies. We have consciousness, that we're able to access that in ways that we know about. But who knows what other ways there are that we don't know about?
True. I mean, that's totally. I totally understand it. So, are we? I got to ask you because we have about 15 minutes left. Are we talking about extraterrestrials or interdimensionals? What is your theory?
We're not talking about traditional sci-fi aliens who get in their ship and fly here. Now, that's not to say those don't also exist, because there's lots of evidence that they do. But we're talking about, as I said, superimposed levels of consciousness that you know how different the life forms are on the bottom of the ocean from what we see at the surface. Imagine if you were a fish swimming just below the surface of the ocean and a motorboat passed by, what would you see? You'd see something that would look to you very much like a UFO. The almond-shaped bottom of path.
I think we lost him one more time. And that's unfortunate because we're running low on time. But I think he's definitely talking about a consciousness. I don't know if I necessarily want to say living in the physical sense, but a sentient, like a light force, like you said, like an orb. It doesn't have a physical, like we say, a physical form. Like he said, the typical extraterrestrial species we hear about. I think we're dealing with something totally different and on a consciousness level. And I think that might be hard for a lot of people to understand. But to me, it may make sense. If you're able to go throughout the universe, it's time and space, a consciousness that doesn't have to worry about the physical difficulties like what we would go to travel through space, but a consciousness that can utilize, that doesn't have to worry about the physicalities involved of traveling, the difficulties, but yet this consciousness light force can maybe travel who knows how fast, who knows how it can manipulate time or space as we understand it. It's really fascinating. And I have to say, interdimensional, like I said earlier, is more the way I lean, that they're able to transcend dimensions and maybe use that like bending space, call it like a wormhole, but they're able to manipulate time and space. Something that we cannot comprehend. It's just way beyond our understanding right now, because we see things the way we understand them today. That's why I mentioned to him earlier, well, if you're talking about a time period, they're going to describe it based on what their understanding is at the time, their surroundings. They may use a wheel or a rock or whatever it is to try to understand what they're looking at the moment. Based on, but like for us, we could say a plane, a rocket. We have more at our disposal to describe things. Even an orb. I don't think an orb would be something that they would use thousands of years ago. A source of a beacon of light. Possibly. Right. You know, like I'm just going to use this as an example, Laird, in the Bible, because I'm a Catholic, and the Ezekiel, the wheel within the wheel. And to me, it sounds like there's something coming in. It's a craft, and there's creatures around it. But that's just my own interpretation. But they're using a wheel. They're using sapphire, the color. It's burning.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to say they're using what's at their disposal.
Right.
To describe something for that time period.
Right. And they don't have the words and they don't have the concepts. And
exactly.
They do the best they can.
So what I'm saying is, like, now, even though we have all these things around us, it may be beyond our human comprehension.
Right.
To think about what we're dealing with, a life form that is a consciousness. It's in the form of an orb. It looks like it's electrical, magnetic, whatever it is. But we are so used to thinking of life as being what we experience here on our planet as humans and animals and everything else. This could be a little bit above and beyond what people truly can understand as a possibility of a life form.
Right.
So, and we got like 10 minutes, but I got to jump to Egypt. You have a book here, and I'm fascinated with Egypt as well. The Great Pyramid Hoax.
Okay, that actually is a book that I wrote a recommendation for. Yeah. I didn't write it.
You wrote the forward.
Right. No, I an endorsement for it. I was asked by the publisher to read the book and to write an endorsement for the book.
So what is your take on the pyramids? Let me ask you this first. Do you think that the Egyptians built those pyramids?
Well, I can say for certain, architecture tells us things. That there's certain symbolism that's associated with certain eras. If we have an energetic half cycle in the first half of the half cycle, like 12,000 years, circular structures or circular symbolism applies to the earth. And so at 7,000 BCs, you have all these houses that are built with circular bases. You get past the midpoint of the half cycle and squareness associates with the earth. And so now you get structures built with a square base. The Dogon have a shrine that's built on a round base. Buddhist stupa is built on a square base. The Great Pyramid is built on a square base. That tells me it was built in the second half of an energetic cycle, the last 6,000 years of a cycle.
Got it.
So that doesn't knock it out of the ballpark of having been built at 2400 BC, the way the Egyptologists think. But because the Great Pyramid has no hieroglyphs in it, the best guess is it was built before there were hieroglyphs, because so many of the other pyramids do have hieroglyphs in them.
That's true. That's an excellent point.
So that pushes it sometime before 3000 BC to have been built. I have little clues like that. I can't say definitely that it was built in a particular era. It also looks as if, the middle of the cycle is about 3600 BC. It's the time when the Hebrew calendar starts. And what I see happening energetically is it becomes more and more difficult to hold open a line of communication for anyone who's here with people in the other domains or with intelligences in the other domains. And they keep building larger and larger and more complicated structures to try to hold open the energetic space they need to be able to communicate.
Now, that's what I was going to get to next, the energetic space. So do you believe that they did serve some type of a purpose, the pyramids?
Yeah, the Great Pyramid has the ability to resonate at all the different frequencies internally. So my best guess is that one of the primary purposes was communication with those other domains. But if so, then as time goes on, you would be moving from stone circles up to more significant structures. The timing of 2400 BC might be just about right for the Great Pyramid in terms of how big a thing they had to build to hold open the gateway. But because there's parallelism in all this, it might go back a full cycle. It could go back another 24,000 years. Who knows?
So maybe they were building bigger and larger ones because they felt that they had the need to make it bigger to harness the energy.
Right. That they needed a different kind of a structure to hold open a gateway.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating because I've heard that theory as well. It's harnessing some type of energy.
Okay, now there's another thing happening with all those structures in Egypt that there are signs that in certain eras, certain construction was happening sort of across the boundary from the domain next to ours, but there was a time difference between the domains. So imagine that you were living in a circumstance where time ran so fast, you only had the longest moment you had to accomplish something across that boundary was pretty long over here, not very long on your side.
Mm.
In that era, you might be cutting 700-ton blocks of stone to build with. But as time goes on, the size of the blocks of stone will get smaller and smaller and smaller because the time frames are coming together, and now you could access a smaller thing. This is like concept of the Planck length. The Planck length, which is supposedly the smallest measure we can make in the quantum world, is a function of the difference in the time scales. That if our time frame were quicker, we could measure a more refined unit.
So by manipulating time is how they were able to construct. Is that what you're saying? Construct?
I'm saying that the factor that's changing energetically from non-materiality to us is the pace of time is slowing down. And it has been all the way along.
To this day.
Right. That time as we experience it right now, a moment in time as we experience is a lot slower than a moment in time. The same moment in time was, a billion years ago.
I wish we had more time, because I would really like to know what the mechanisms of this slowing or speeding of time is. And is it tied to these cosmic teachers and this consciousness?
It's tied to the wavelength of the energy. And as the wavelength gets longer, time slows down.
So we can manipulate that. Right now, do you think that they're using that technology right now to manipulate that energy to create propulsion devices that we may be using?
No, I'm sure they're trying to manipulate it in the ways they can, but I don't know what the limits are on them being able to do that.
But if they're able to tap into it, and they're getting the information from based on, like what you said, the information that the Dogon and maybe other ancient civilizations had at their disposal at that time, maybe they have stuff that we're not aware of.
Well, I'm sure they do. I'm pretty sure that any UFO that we have direct view of is not off planet. It's ours.
I tend to agree with you on that one.
That we've had long enough to develop the technology that we can produce vehicles that mimic what the actual UFOs are doing. And so we have to be very careful about what we accept as being disclosure.
I agree.
For me, anything short of Klaatu and Gort on the National Mall isn't disclosure.
Even then, a lot of people may not believe it. They're going to say,
right.
This is part of a false flag or something else going on. It's going to take a lot to convince the masses that this is actually
anything that's genuine in the system that I study, anything that's original to the system I study, comes with a degree of self-confirmation of meaning. In other words, you have a way of verifying that it's legitimate. It doesn't just say a thing one way. Like at Göbekli Tepe, the symbolism is talking about these two energies, magnetism and electricity, that come together. And they repeat the same concept in a dozen different ways. Wow. You can't mistake what they're talking about because they've said it in a dozen different ways whose meanings have survived down through the eras.
Yep. Well, Laird, obviously it's a pleasure and honor to speak with you. This was sudden for me. Unfortunately, Peter lost power as well.
Yes.
And we had our little storm issues going on, but it was a pleasure to speak with you tonight. Anything upcoming for you? You got any new books? I know you had that book earlier. I think that's the newest book, right?
That's the newest book. I'm working on other projects right now, but nothing pending that's close to publication.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Meanwhile, here on Earth, and hopefully Peter will get you on in the near future, and hopefully we won't have any weather issues to
yes, that's how.
Listen, God bless you, and I'm so glad that your health is coming back, and you're getting better day by day. And we'll do this again sometime soon. So, Laird, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And everybody out there, have a great night. Next week, Peter will be a pre-record. He'll be in Roswell. I'll be in Roswell. We're all going to be in Roswell, KGRA DB. So maybe we'll see you there at the booth with Peter. And till next week, everyone have a great night.
and we'll see you then. Good night, everybody.